All right. So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion. My name is Jems Guirguis. I'm a current 2L at the University of Minnesota. I'm a staff member with our Journal of Law and Inequality. Today, we're going to be focusing on a rapid and very fascinating discussion in regards to AI and facial recognition technology. It's going to be a quick talk about how we're going to explore the technology intersection with racial inequality and privacy and discrimination, and how it impacts marginalized communities. I'm very happy today. We have a special guest with us joining today. He's a partner at Goodwin Procter. His name is Omer Tene, who's a leading expert in privacy and technology. And just before we get started, I'd love for you to give us your background and your journey throughout the law and what kind of led you into the data privacy and AI technology world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jems, for that kind introduction. So I actually started my path as a corporate lawyer, but in the early 2000s, 2003 or 4, I pivoted and switched fields really to privacy and data protection, which at the time was kind of in its infancy. And it's rare to have an opportunity in law to get into a field kind of at the ground floor because tort and contract and corporate and tax have existed for hundreds or even thousands of years, whereas privacy law is really new. And I mean, of course, it has pedigree, kind of also going back to the Bible and sort of ancient legal systems. But as kind of a new legal concept that really took off in the late 1990s with the emergence of the commercial internet and the internet economy. Companies realized that data is a major asset, but also presents risks. And one of the central risks is privacy. So I've been in this space for about 20 years. I worked in think tanks, in academia, with governments, and most lately at a law firm on really all matters, privacy and cybersecurity law. And this is, GDPR in Europe and like an alphabet soup of federal and state legislation in the United States. Over the past 2 years, the focus has shifted again to AI. It was really, when OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November 2022, so exactly 2 years ago, when suddenly it like became like a feeding frenzy really for businesses, for government policymakers, and for industry. And we've been immersed in AI and AI law over the past couple of years.
Yeah, no, 100%. I know with the rise of AI and technology and that intersection, specifically today in regards to like facial scanning technology, can you kind of give us a breakdown on that, what that is and what the use of it is today in society?
Yeah, so facial scanning, typically referred to as facial recognition, although it means different things and different technologies, has existed and has been evolving for a decade or more. And it's important to understand that it does mean different things because you have technologies, for example, for facial detection, where so if you think of the camera on your iPhone, it knows to focus on a face now without identifying whose face it is, what kind of face it is. It just knows that this is a face, and you can think of different applications for this. For example, a smart billboard that will start showing an advertisement when a person walks by, or there are different applications. Kind of one notch more accurate is what we call facial characterization. And this is a technology that can look at a face and not just identify it as a face, a human face, but also give certain sort of lessons that it can derive from it. So, for example, what age or age bracket is this person? What gender? What race? And you can see that that already becomes much more privacy relevant and potentially sensitive. Um, in the recognition sort of realm, we typically divide between authentication and identification systems. Authentication is a one-to-one basically match. So it has a reference photo or template. This is Jems or this is Omer. And every time it looks at a picture, it just says, is this who this person pertains to be? So this can be very useful, for example, at an airport or a border crossing, where you can type your name, the system has your old photograph, and the camera sees you, and all it says is this the person who they claim to be? Is this Omer? So that's authentication. And I think the most commonly used application of this is, again, here, your iPhone, where you unlock it with your face, right? So it will only recognize your face. It won't recognize anyone else, but that's the point. Facial recognition is the most sort of privacy sensitive technology because it compares one to many. So now it has a large database, and I show it a photo or a person, and it will say, this is Jems, this is Omer, this is, someone else, based on being able to pick you out from a crowd. And this can obviously invoke all kinds of concerns about, being able to track people in public spaces, kind of like a cookie across the internet. It's as if you really have the cookie plastered to your face, because you can be identified anywhere as long as the reference database has one of your photos or templates. And of course, given that everyone's photo is online at this point in multiple locations, and you can look at, for example, my photos on the Goodwin website, and it's publicly available. I'm sure yours is too, Jems, on University of Michigan, Minnesota, sorry, or somewhere else. And previous employer, like social media, of course, is as we kind of go to the younger generation that was born with it, into it, really. So everybody has, their face in a reference database, and thereby becoming a potential target for tracking of this sort.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean it's obviously beneficial, like you said, whether it's at the airport or at border control. It's very interesting that how it's being applied, whether, the use of it from our phone, but now in, for safety concerns, or how law enforcement is utilizing it. I know there was a recent example with the Mall of America. They introduced this new technology, the facial recognition technology, in response to like several gun-related incidents in recent years, but kind of shifting into that, it was mainly for people who are trespassers or who are considered a threat. Is it accurate? how accurate is this technology? And basically, in this situation, it mistaked a bunch of people who were just shopgoers. So how do we kind of, strike the balance of safety concern versus, it's misclassifying a person of color, for example, in that situation?
Yeah, great question. And obviously, that's where a lot of the concerns lie. I have to say, not just with respect to facial recognition technologies, but AI more broadly, systems that can make decisions that are potentially very consequential for individuals based on analyzing data in data sets and training on data. I have to say I don't have specific knowledge or details about the Mall of America deployment, but I can tell you that there has been an FTC enforcement action in this space against Rite Aid, the pharmacy chain, alleging that Rite Aid deployed cameras for a similar purpose to identify shoplifters or people of interest, people of concern. And there was part of the allegations of the FTC in these cases are settled, so they're not adjudicated. So it's all kind of, it remains at the level of allegations, was that there were biases baked into the system. And we know this from research projects also, that, for example, facial recognition systems have a harder time working with and identifying darker faces than lighter faces. And the reason is that the training data sets are skewed and biased themselves, not because of any sort of malevolent intention, I'm guessing, but just because, for example, if you use all of the faces that appear in newspapers, right? That's a publicly available source that you can train data with. Well, looking back historically, the vast majority of those faces would be of white males. So, if the systems learn to train on data that leans male, compared to female, or that lean white compared to other faces, then the outcomes will be biased as well. And it's a problem that we see across the board with AI applications. They're only as good as the training data sets, and the training data sets are oftentimes not equitable, because society hasn't been equitable historically, and this can create self-fulfilling fantasy prophecies also, um, where if the system, imagine like an AI system that's deployed for employment applications, so for hiring people. And you have systems like this, already in operation. So they sift through resumes, for example. Now the system learns that, who's the typical banker. I don't want to kind of point fingers at any specific industry, but let's just imagine. And as a matter of fact, it turns out that bankers are typically white male, okay? And like as a result of some historic bias. Well, now the system learns that that's what a successful candidate probably looks like, and it might demote the application of women, for example, and that can kind of reverberate through the ecosystem. So if women aren't successful at kind of penetrating these algorithms at the hiring stage, well, maybe they shouldn't study in college or in university in a field that prepares one for that because they're not going to get the job anyways, right? So now the system will also kind of prevent or weigh against women learning for different college degrees or majors. And in fact, if that's the case, let's maybe go back to K-12 and teach girls different kind of topics than boys. So I think you can see why these systems, if the databases that they use to train, and this can be facial recognition or different applications, aren't set up equitably and fairly, and oftentimes they're not, not because of bad intentions, but just because that's what kind of society looks like. It's the snapshot. The result is this perpetuating bias machine, which is very hard to kind of break, and obviously, big societal problem.
Yeah, 100%. I know I've read a bunch of articles about the bias and how the data that's being inputted, that's the issue on these language learning models. And because itself is biased. And I know there was a bunch of articles online, and from a Colorado article, it said that there's studies showing that Asian and African Americans are up to 100 times more likely to be misidentified than white individuals, specifically white men. So again, we like you hit the nail right on the head. It was exactly what you had said earlier. And, I'm assuming in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully there'll be some correction to the bias. But, I was at the airport and at TSA, they have these new facial technology again, and it's supposed to speed up the process. But like we've been talking about and over, kind of misidentifying, is it really speeding up the process? I know it's a pilot program, or is it again like another way to, for the safety, of course, but how do we kind of strike that balance again, kind of going back into the balance of for safety, making sure things are more efficient, but at the same time, if it's misidentifying, is it just counterintuitive or do we just have to wait until it's fixed?
Yeah, so there's always a tricky balance to be struck between false negatives and false positives. And, it's how you want to calibrate the system. If a false negative could be a false negative, meaning the system doesn't identify some, say, person that it needs to, whereas a false positive is that it picks up, let's call them suspects, although they're not. The more you kind of set up the system to prevent false negatives, the more you'll have false positives. That's just kind of an artifact, right, of the system. Now, if we're talking about systems that are supposed to prevent, terrorism or national security risks, obviously a false negative is incredibly costly, right? Like it's the security of like a plane or like a country. So you'll want to prevent them at any cost. But, part and parcel with that is that the system will kind of single out a bunch of people who are false positives. So they're identified as suspects or as people of interest, where in fact they've done nothing wrong. And why were they identified? Well, you need to kind of check, do an analysis of the data. But based on what we said earlier, one of the reasons could be that they are in a group that's, sort of kind of the system doesn't work with as well, doesn't identify as well, for some reason is being targeted. So, I think it's a delicate balance. You can see why these systems have advantages, And you're talking about TSA, it's very convenient, right? Much faster, the line moves faster, everyone's happy. Well, everyone except those people who are selected and have to spend like either a much more intrusive check or even more, like a couple of hours at the border crossing, without really having done anything wrong. So that's kind of the cost benefit there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Thank you for that insight. Kind of shifting from the bias and then into the privacy concerns that you touched on briefly. I kind of want to dive deeper into that because that's also something that is going to be interesting to see. And there's some recent examples on in the news and some lawsuits that have been settled in regards to some privacy concerns. How do you, in just overall arching idea, how do you define like data privacy? And why would it be crucial, for example, in protecting like AI facial scans? Because if it's taking a, it's scanning my face, for example, and then it's staying on the in the data for what, a couple months or so, is it actually being deleted or is it going to be staying on there forever and being circulated or sold to other third parties?
Yeah. Well, Jems, those are exactly the type of questions that are really important in kind of distinguishing between different systems and the risks that are kind of inherent in them. So, you asked me to define data privacy. That will take like we should do like a 13-hour course about that. And even at the end, we probably won't, figure it out completely. But I'll give you one kind of aspect or view of data privacy, or one kind of risk use case, and it's the crushing of anonymity in public spaces. Right? Historically, you and I travel to New York City, we can roam the streets, go to Central Park, go to a movie, a restaurant, without like somebody, right? Either like a big brother type of government or kind of a slightly smaller but still big brother type of company, or maybe even your parents or my spouse, like knowing where we are at any given point in time. Enter powerful facial recognition of the identification type that we talked about earlier, so the one to many. And now you are like like a dot on a map where people can kind of track your movements throughout the city 24/7, 365. Well, if you have no anonymity whatsoever anymore in public spaces, that really restricts your privacy, however defined, as a fundamental right, kind of freedom from surveillance by government, by businesses, or just as a feeling, you have even kind of vis-a-vis people who are close to you. So there's no question that these technologies can be powerful and damaging to privacy. However, the devil's in the details. So, like we said earlier, if it's a one-to-one algorithm that's not one-to-many, now it only identifies you where you present yourself to identification, right? And you make a claim. So let's say you could enter a Broadway show with just facial recognition based on having bought a ticket and uploaded the photo. So that's less intimidating, right? Than this thing follows you around New York City all the time. Or, as you said, if you delete the data after a short period of time, and sometimes you don't even need to hold it for a month, sometimes even an instant is enough. So the system retains it for like, a minute or a second just to make the one-to-one match and then disposes it. Um, So is it one to one or one to many? Is it how long is the data retained? Is it on device or is it in the cloud? So, for example, if my facial template is just on this device, the iPhone, it's much less potentially damaging than if it exists somewhere in like the central database on the cloud. So these are some of the parameters that you could engineer or design into a technology in order to make it less kind of ominous and damaging, while still achieving a lot of the goals that we mentioned. Efficiency, like the line will still move faster without this becoming some dystopian kind of surveillance world.
Sure, no, and that's it's great to hear that. I know that with the rapid development of technology, obviously regulation is it's harder to keep up with a lot of newer laws. And there was a recent example of the ACLU had reported about Clearview AI. They just settled a lawsuit for violating privacy rights because they kept a lot of millions of individuals data stored and were selling it to third parties. How do we, how do we kind of, I don't want to say strike a balance, but how do we propose regulation to that? How do we, hey, tell this company shouldn't be doing this, or, what's a way that these companies can make sure that they're abiding by regulation or future regulation that will be in place? I'm assuming, in the next couple years, there's going to be different types of regulation for AI because it's just growing every day. So would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so with respect to Clearview AI specifically, it's a fascinating story, and there's a great book that was published a couple of
Oh,
months ago by Kashmir Hill. She's a New York Times reporter, and she wrote the book on the Clearview AI story, and it reads like a mystery novel. It's like the characters are kind of mind-boggling. So I really recommend it to you and the other students at Minnesota Law. But yeah, I think they got into trouble, right? Because they deployed sort of the most ominous type of facial recognition technology, the one that crushes kind of anonymity and privacy in public without guardrails and safeguards and sort of without designing for privacy. So I think, being ethical in complying with the law goes a long way to prevent, these huge kind of privacy snafus and backlashes, which are then just very damaging to businesses.
yeah, I've definitely got to read that book now because I feel like the articles don't do the justice from what you're saying. But one last final question here, just kind of wrapping things up. What are your like final thoughts on, the implication of AI facial scanning technology and any, from your expertise, advising clients or just, your everyday work of working with like data privacy and technology? Do you see any techniques on the horizon to make sure that, these companies are collecting data ethically and at the same time, and I think I'm a pretty optimistic person, but I think that, this technology will get better and there could be some kind of way that we're able to eliminate the bias or at least minimize it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Look, Jems, I think you got it exactly right in terms of what the opportunities are, but also the concerns. So my hope is really people like you and the other students in your class who are learning and understanding the issues here. Once you hit the job market and go into policy roles or legal compliance roles at the tech companies, I think we'll be okay.
Well, that sounds great. It's a lot of pressure on our shoulders, I guess. But I don't know if you have anything else to add on for today, any comments that you want to say?
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was a pleasure. And maybe get Kashmir Hill for the next one to tell you about the Clearview AI book.
Oh, that'd be awesome. But I just want to thank you as well for joining us today. I know you're very busy, but we're very appreciative of you kind of with our discussion. I've had a great time. I know the time went by quick, but I do appreciate your insights and your expertise on this matter. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting me, James.
Yep.